This is the show that we opened last Friday, and before we closed it, we wanted to do kind of a conversation about the work here with Joe. And what I want to do is kind of do a two-way conversation versus just me talking about the work or him just talking about the work. I would like to say a few things about my own how I interpret some of the idea of the work, and then you can respond to that, and we can go back and forth. And this is kind of a thing that I'm doing now more often with solo shows or curated exhibitions to kind of create a dialogue of what the work is about. You have the opening, when people come into the opening, and it's just a big party, but there's not really much time to talk about the work. The reason why I'm here. So this kind of gives us a more in-depth conversation with the artist. We can document it as well. And the idea is to create a kind of a more intimate setting, right? That we don't invite the whole crowd that it's invited for their Friday, rather just a few people. And so far the ones that we have done have been successful, having fun, and we get a laugh out of that. And so thanks for coming. So this exhibition is really wonderful, and Joe's been planning this show since last year, right? In terms of when we scheduled it, and as we came closer to the exhibition and did the selections of the works, it really came together really nicely, really wonderful. For me, as a gallery owner, and to have Joe here with me exhibiting is really something that I find very wonderful, because Joe, as I tell everyone, Joe was my first college professor, and I owe to him a lot of the things I have all now, because of, he instilled in me that desire to keep making art, and I found in his class to be something wonderful. And so I find that in his work, each one of the pieces in the show, to me, they're about a dialogue and a conversation that a person kind of encounters or enters with, almost like if coming into a classroom again and entering into a room where there's a dialogue of different things but happening, and one enters in first as a stranger. And as one enters as a stranger, kind of one first takes a look at the room and see what's in the room, who's in the room, and then one tries to kind of decode and find what's happening. And I find the same thing in each of the pieces. As every time I come to the gallery and I look at the work, I keep finding new things. I keep finding these things, and that's kind of the conversation that keeps me going into the work. And I think that's what makes a work of art successful, that it engages the viewer in some way or some fashion. And when I enter into Joe's world, into each of these pieces, I'm invited into that conversation. And the first thing that I try to do is try to decode the language that's being put in place through all the different pieces that Joe has selected and to put together into each work. And there's a really beautiful kind of a craftsmanship that is put into the work. That is, you cannot find a hint of glue. Somebody told me in the opening, I cannot find any hint of glue. It's like, maybe there's no, I don't know how he sticks this stuff, but there's that level of intricacy that one does not get deviated by, where one can focus on the symbolism and the objects, why the objects are together, how do they interact with each other, how they play together. And some of the work is kind of, as I find it, more serious in tone, like this one called The Offering versus his self-portrait, which is one of the more playful and colorful pieces in the exhibition. But something that really fascinates me about the show is that I find over the years I have met a lot of artists who work with kind of recycle objects and recycle ideas and found objects, but I don't see Joe working too much with the recycle, but rather with the idea of the remember. That's how you title the show. It's not necessarily the stuff that people has thrown out, but there's a sense of intimacy within the objects. They're not broken or destroyed or in decay, but rather they are beautifully clean, beautifully kept together, beautifully stored. I don't know how you store your stuff at home, but I imagine they're not just all piled in one corner. As many artists that I know that work with these recycle objects, but yours have a level of cleanness and neatness and that sophistication, within each of the pieces that has been selected to be added into the work. And so, when I was thinking about the shop and thinking about Joe, I think of him as an artist on a rescue mission, who is in the mission of rescuing these objects that are forgotten and trying to find new life for them, taken away from the mundane into the everyday, ordinary life, into the extraordinary world of art, where we look at these objects now in awe and trying to create some sort of meaningful conversation with them. Whether it's an object that perhaps is a one of a kind, or whether it's an object that's manufactured. Probably there might be thousands of these little cards, but it is this one, that was kind of creating a whole new conversation that continues to invite the viewer. So I guess my first question, Joyce, as you work with these pieces, do you see yourself as kind of this idea of rescuing the objects, not really discarded or destroyed, but more than collected, and special in some way or fashion?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, as you know, I've done a lot of things with crucifixes, and some of the crucifixes I find are in pretty bad shape. Sometimes the arms are broken, or the Christ figure is dislocated from the cross. And sometimes when I buy those at thrift stores, I really feel like I'm rescuing Jesus, because some of them are really bad shape. And I often thought about maybe doing a show with just bandaged up Jesus, cross forms, but I haven't done that yet. But yeah, I think sometimes I feel like I'm rescuing things, and trying to celebrate them and elevate them. As you say, some of them look brand new, some of them look like they've been used, but they all kind of have a very clean, kind of orderly look to them. So a lot of people have noticed that about my work, that they usually think of found object sculpture as being kind of junky.
Yeah.
Then you can see the nails and the glue, and I use magic glue. That's why you can't see it. It's magic glue. And I'm the only person that has it. But I work really hard to hide the way that I attach things, and it's a real challenge sometimes because, as you can see, all these materials are incredibly different from each other, and it's hard enough to find the objects, but it's even harder to figure out how to make them stick together, And so, basically I put all this stuff together with a hand drill, a hand miter box, and 5-minute epoxy, screws and dowels. I don't have any sophisticated equipment. Every now and then I have to use a table saw, but it's all very, very small hand tools, files, saws, and things I can do with my hands.
That's great. That's cool. And you kind of pointed, which was kind of going to be my second question, into the religious aspect, the spiritual aspect of things, in which, as you walk through the show, with no doubt you'll find a lot of sometimes saints or crucifix or things of that nature that you incorporate in your work, and kind of every object has meaning. One associates meaning with objects, but when you choose to work with a religious object, then that kind of elevates the type of meaning that is going to trigger on people. And so kind of my question is, as you work with the selection of objects, and let's say you pick something that has religious significance, either to you or someone else, how much into play comes the idea of the meaning of using that word within the context of the other pieces? Because I know it's not just an aesthetic choice, but then the moment you pick that object, because it has such a meaning, strong meaning, what it stands for, especially in Western culture, how do you then continue to play into that association?
I think the religious, meanings of objects, are really tricky things to play with. One of the pieces I have in here is called Time to Save. And it's basically a vintage bank, probably made about the time I was a kid. I remember buying vintage banks like that for 50 cents a piece.
Wow.
So we have a clock face smiling, and right below it says time to save. And the minute I saw that, I thought, save what? Money or your soul, so to speak. And, the religious thing, I think, is there's probably 3 or 4 pieces in the show that deal directly or indirectly with religious or spiritual things. And, you and I and Pedro did a show, a 3-person show called Triada, where we dealt with spirituality in our own different ways. And that's just one of those things that I deal with. A lot of, if I were to describe my work to anybody in 3 words, I would say it's all about memories, it's all about tactility, and it's all about reliquaries. And so with that in mind, it's like, I like the idea of these things being reliquaries. They're like depositories for these relics, these grail objects and these grail events in my life. And certainly, I think one of the big grail events in anybody's life is just trying to figure out the God issue. Is there, isn't there, what's my purpose, what's my connection if there is, or what's my connection if there isn't? And so that's just an ongoing dialogue I have with myself. And I think that most people kind of have, whether they want to admit it or not. And so the time to save piece is, it's a toy bank stuck on top of one of the deathbed crosses. The cross is sort of hidden in part. And, there's other pieces in here too. But yeah, the religious imagery is really a little tricky. I try to update it and reinvent it a little bit, or kind of give it a different slant. The other piece that I have in here, the 2-part piece that's next to that one, it's called Blind Faith. It's in a 2-part piece, and in the upper half you see the typical picture that you would see if you ever went to vacation Bible school or took any kind of child's Bible class, where there's Jesus and the children are on his lap, and it says Jesus loves me underneath it. The second part of that piece is an abacus on top of a handmade plaque, which basically quotes a verse from Job, where it basically says, I will follow him even though he shall kill me. And, it's sort of, that piece kind of contrasts the child view of Christianity or Jesus and maybe the adult view of that. I mean, they don't usually talk to you about, oh, by the way, God may kill you when you're a child, but I mean, it kind of contrasts 2 different, sort of like the naive child approach to, Jesus and Christianity, and maybe the adult approach, when you start reading the Bible in specific. So I kind of put those, that's why I have them in 2 different parts. So that's just kind of an ongoing philosophical debate I have with myself, about, how this is supposed to work, and how I relate to that. And I think everybody has that connection, whether they are atheists or believers or whatever you want to call that,
And I think just because you use it the way you use it, then you invite the viewer into a discussion with the work and into an interpretation.
They're more like, I don't have any answers in these pieces. They're more like philosophical questions at best, and so, I'm just kind of presenting the question with, hopefully with unique visuals that will engage people to rethink about that whole issue.
And even though some of the objects that you're using have this strong connection with religious and so forth, but there's also a playfulness that sometimes you use as kind of dance between. It's not irreverent, and it kind of plays in between nicely. Where you can then come up with some conversations that might be interesting.
I find that I use a lot of toys, and vintage toys in particular, because they relate to my childhood. But I find that sometimes serious issues, like the time to save. I mean, it's a smiling clock, for heaven's sake. How serious can this get? But it kind of, sometimes I think you can approach very serious things in a very naive, kind of childlike, with toys or with toy banks, and kind of make it more palatable by presenting it in a different way. Kind of going through the back doors or the front door.
Right. Yeah. No, very interesting. And speaking about toys, that was another thing I wanted to bring about. That there's a lot of objects that uses pieces of toys. Some of which I remember also playing with at some point. Sometimes use objects that have not necessarily American, but like symbols from Mexico or things that you found. And I find those two also be quite interesting in the way they are all put together into one single conversation. And I know you're working with Pedro sometimes. At some point you did some pieces that have to do with immigration impression as
Right.
well. So how those, and I know some pieces here perhaps relate to a specific person, how does a relationship, let's say with someone, kind of might give you an impulse to create an object that's associated with that, even including your self-portrait, being you, how those objects were seen.
Yeah, a lot of these pieces, I mean, a lot of the grail moments in my life, I mean, the memories, those three things I mentioned before, memories and tactility and reliquaries, I mean, the memories are sort of like grail moments. The moments might be memories of people, places, things, events, philosophical issues. They're really big, important things, and people are a big part of anybody's life. And so, I occasionally do a self-portrait about myself, and or some of my former students. This one called The Other is about a former student of mine that I've done some elaborate things with, and the other relates to her other. To get that straight. I've been happily married man for 37 years. But it's her other side. I mean, she is a person in my life, because she's a former student. We've done a few collaborative pieces, but it's more about her dark side. And she even had a little bit of input. It wasn't really a full-fledged collaborative piece, but she had a little bit of input. She made me self-portrait and just gave it to me one day and said, "Here, you can have this." And then I kind of started looking for things to put with this, and the self-portrait is kind of a very whimsical, kind of fun piece about a lot of toys in there. My favorite bird is the red-headed woodpecker. I'm a big bird watcher. I'm an amateur ornithologist, and for years when I wasn't making art, I was basically out bird watching all the time. And so that's why there's a lot of bird imagery. I know birds are real popular right now. It's like if you don't know what to do, you stick a bird in it. I've heard several artists say that. If you don't know what to do, stick a bird in it.
Just put a bird.
And for somebody
I think I know that. I just did it last series.
I know. But I'm sure it was genuine. I know you're not an ornithologist myself, but I'm going to give you the benefit of that.
I remember when I was in your class a long time ago, one of the students said, "Oh, Joe's a bird watcher." What does that mean?
What does that mean? But I've been watching birds there. And actually, that was probably the first thing I ever drew with birds. I mean, the art of the birds actually grew up right from an early age. And so they're kind of have always been together. And, but the birds. So there's bird imagery in there. I kind of envision myself at night. So I use a lot of letters and blocks occasionally just to be real demonstrative about a certain idea. Like there's the word that there's ever. You have to connect the ever and the faithful together. The ever faithful. My middle name supposedly might mean that in French or German.
You're a knight and whatever.
I like the idea.
That's a big super.
I like that idea. I live a knight, ever faithful. It's the classic, Sir Galahad, Sir Lancelot, all that stuff. So I put all that stuff on a shield that basically I found at a thrift store. I think it's probably from medieval times, And so there's hammers and there's things that relate to art making, the hammer, the saw, and the idea of a ruler measuring things. But a lot of the things on there are vintage or appear to be vintage in terms of the surfaces. People. This other one over here called "Somewhere Under the Rainbow," a piece I did for my youngest daughter, Julie, and it's just it reflects the trials and tribulations of growing up, and as much as everybody wants to go over the rainbow, most of the time we're underneath it. Myself included. And so I put this vintage handmade doll on top of a glow-in-the-dark angel. So this thing actually glows in the dark. So it has the illusion as though you might actually put this in a child's bedroom. And it would glow at night, so she wouldn't be afraid because there's an angel behind the doll. I like things that look like the idea of craft is a really interesting thing. I use a lot of craft items. I use a lot of things that if I go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Dick Blick, I go to the craft section. I'm looking at push pins instead of tubes of paint. Believe it or not. Yeah, because there's a lot of different kinds of push pins. I'm always looking for the right thing. And so, you know, a lot of materials I use are have a kind of a crafty angle to them. And I really like using very unsophisticated craft items in my work. And even kind of this almost looks like it could be a wall hanging in a child's room or something. You know, I like that reference point, you know. I'm not afraid of decorative, I'm not afraid of craft. I mean, I think you can elevate those things to fine art, you know.
Thanks again, Joe, for the show. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah.